Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the eCommerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the eCommerce Edge podcast. It is my incredible pleasure to welcome our amazing next guest, Mr. George KAPERNAROS from Yocto. Welcome to the podcast, George.
Thank you for having me.
It is my absolute pleasure to have you along with me for the ride today. And before we get into what Yocto is and does, you're an agency, but before we get into what work you do and what you specialize in, why don't you tell us how you got to be in this space, how you got to be in this wonderful world of e-com, digital marketing, retention, etc.
How long do you have to do that? Right?
Maybe give us the short version and we'll start from there.
The short version is that I stumbled on it. I didn't really study marketing, didn't really study e-commerce, didn't plan to work on this. It basically had an accident. I could not walk, I hurt my spine. That was right after university. And what I did was that I literally Googled, how do you make money writing? Because I was writing good essays at school. So I found copywriting, and through copywriting, I started learning a little bit about marketing until I eventually landed a gig at an e-commerce company that was back then quite small. And by the time I left, it had 100 people and contractors. And I grew with the company in a way. I started as a copywriter, then I was the lead copywriter, then a marketing manager, and eventually a marketing director. So basically I was, besides the two owners of the company, the highest ranking marketing executive. So I left that, became a freelancer, a consultant, and then I got lucky and I landed a very big project with a company called Kilo Health. It's one of the fastest growing in Europe. And basically this created a lot of demand for my services. And after a point, I figured that using my name, George KAPERNAROS, is a very bad idea because nobody can say it. First of all, that's one thing. And then the second thing is it doesn't really, I guess, inspire confidence in the company because it feels like it's just one guy there. And if you want to build a big company, it better be rebranded into an agency. So I started Yocto like this, and it all grew from there organically.
Wow. And you're not just a digital marketer. You don't just own an agency. You're also a fellow podcaster, CEO After Dark. You've been doing that for a year and a half now. So how did the podcasting effort come about?
Oof, that's a good one. So two reasons. Number one is way better than me. It's an amazing tool to meet people. I don't think there's a better way to build a network than having a podcast, frankly. Like you get to speak to people that can be partners, that can be clients, that can be friends, frankly, over time. So it's an amazing tool in that perspective. And then there was a personal reason as well, which is basically, I think there's too much content about the mega entrepreneurs, the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs of the world and all of that, but there's not enough everyday business owners like myself telling their story and how they got to where they are today. So I figured that if you find leaders that have had success in business and then get them to share their story, it can be a little bit more relatable and hopefully more inspiring for people that are listening. So that was behind it. It's not a project that I would say, prioritizing. I do it as a passion project, which is a little bit annoying because I wish I could spend more time, but it's going on the back and it's going strong. As you said, it's over a year now.
Wow. Exciting times. Look, I love being a podcaster. It has brought so many amazing things into my life that I could have never imagined. Some of my closest friends now came through a chance meeting on the podcast, and then so many other things, the opportunity to speak at conferences and travel the world and hang out with friends that I've met online. It's been an incredible relationship builder, I guess is the best term that I could say about the podcast, is that it opens doors to creating relationships that is difficult to create any other way. If you slide into someone's DMs on LinkedIn and you want to just have a virtual coffee with them, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say no because they think you're trying to sell them something. But if you have a podcast, and especially if you have 1, 2, 3, 400 episodes, you're legitimate. You're just trying to You're not just trying to get potential prospects on your podcast. Once you get up to hundreds of episodes, it starts to lend some authenticity to what you do. And I think that is probably the single biggest benefit that comes out of it.
When did yours really start to pick up? Like what?
It was look, I started it in 2016, but I wasn't really consistent with it until 2018. So until I got consistent with it myself, obviously it's very difficult to build a consistent listenership if you're not consistent with your podcast. I was intermittent. I would do one a week, and then I would do one a month, and then I would do one every 2 weeks, and there was just no consistency. So by 2018, I was releasing one episode a week. Then I think it was 2020, I added the mentorship, which was then 2 episodes a week. And then about a year after that, I added the B2B. So we're up to 3 episodes per week, every single week. And I've been doing that consistently for about 3 years now. So once you get consistent, then people can anticipate your episodes. They can have confidence that if they put you on the playlist, that they know that you're going to be there for them. And I think that consistency it's an underrated thing in podcasting.
I see. And in terms of, sorry, I'm just like trying to learn it.
Yeah, of
In
course. It's
capital,
both. So, well, it's organic in the sense that I don't do any paid marketing behind my podcast at all, but it's not only discovery through Spotify because I'm hosted on Spotify and I'm approved for video on Spotify, so it's a video podcast on Spotify. Of course, it goes out to all the major audio channels. I also upload it to YouTube and Rumble. So, obviously I get, a lot of viewership and listenership through those organic platforms, but then of course, I post to LinkedIn, I post to X, I post to Reddit about the podcast episodes when they drop as well. So, yeah, it's a hard slog, especially initially. Once you get that consistent listenership, and if you're consistent with quality content that resonates, I'm a big believer that your vibe attracts your tribe. And if you can be consistent with your style, with kind of the topics and the themes that you speak to, you'll find the people out there that are interested in the same types of things that you are. And then once you find that, and once you start to build an audience within that cohort of people, they tend to be pretty committed. That's the great thing about podcasts. Is they tend to be very sticky. Once someone finds you and once someone puts you into their rotation, it tends to be very sticky as long as you're consistent.
I think the best advice I've shared on this is that if you're being yourself, it's easy to just stay consistent, right? Because you are being yourself, basically. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do. I try
Yeah.
like the content that I tend to post, it's mostly me just sharing my thoughts on things. I mean, we
Yes.
do retention marketing, we do like subscriptions, we do like a lot of specialized work at sea, but you'll also see me selling stuff about, I don't know, like difficulty about having an agency because it's on my mind, or like things with clients or team members. It's just things that are happening to me. So
Yeah, I did the same. So when I first started out in 2016, it was a solo podcast. I didn't do any interviews. It was all me. It was all my thoughts. It was all my experiences. It was based on what I was learning in the industry at the time. And I found that if I wanted to put out the kind of volumes of content that I wanted to produce, it was difficult to do that at the level of scale I wanted as a solo podcast. And so I found that the interview format was more interesting from a scale perspective because I could bring experts in to talk about things I wasn't necessarily an expert in. And it was two things to it. One is it allowed me to scale in ways I couldn't, and two, it was an educational experience for me bringing in people that were talking about things that I didn't know much about. And so it was a two-pronged approach. And once I went to an interview format, then I was able to become a lot more consistent. I was able to be a lot more scalable, and I was able to frankly give people a platform that maybe otherwise wouldn't have had much of a platform to tell their story. And so it was my effort, my love letter back to the industry, a way of sending the letter back down again. I've been in this industry for 25 years, and it's been extremely good to me. I've been able to create an amazing life out of my friendships and partnerships in this industry. Yeah, podcasting is an amazing thing, but let's not make the whole episode about podcasting. I could talk about podcasting for hours because I love it. I guess from a very high level, Yocto, I look at you guys as a retention focused agency, right? Whether that be CRO, whether that be email, whether that be subscription, logic, management, strategy, at least now, transparently, never worked with you. We've never worked on projects before. We've never had any joint clients. But if I just read what's on the tin, it definitely comes across that your experience, your background is heavily focused on client retention. Would that be an accurate understanding?
It is precisely accurate. And this might age poorly because you never know what happens in the future. But for now, that's the only thing we do. We only do retention marketing. We only do it for health and wellness companies. So we're specialized in the service, in the vertical, and even the business model because we do it for subscription health and wellness companies. It's as focused as it gets. The reality of it is that we do have, I think we do honor the name retention marketing, right? Because usually people use this, but what they call email marketing, they design nice emails and then they schedule them. And that's more or less it. We don't really do just that. We do that, but on top of this, we also try to actually move the needle on metrics that are not immediately visible on a Klaviyo dashboard. It's not just that they subscribe for a longer time. Like those things is what retention marketing is ultimately.
Wow. I think niching down is a superpower. I niche down heavily on the B2B space, and I it's always scary when you first we all know logically that niching down is the way because it's the smaller the niche, the easier it is to dominate it, the easier it is to own it, the easier it is to specialize in it and develop a super deep understanding of that niche. But on the flip side, there's something in our human brains that says, by definition, niching down means that I'm eliminating
Yeah.
many other opportunities that I could potentially execute on, could potentially even do a great job at. But it's, I guess it's easier to create a blue ocean environment the tighter your niche is, right? As opposed to if you try to
I
be
agree.
all things to all people, it's automatically red ocean by definition.
100%. And I used to be the same and think that, oh, like it's scary to this down, etc. But I think what really helped me, and I'm only saying this in case it helps other people, is to look at this from a different perspective, which is that when you niche down, one of the things you do is that you reduce the number of variables, which ultimately means that it's much easier to systematize and then delegate and then ultimately also doing scaling the company. So potentially for a super consultant that is solving the most complex problems, it is okay to not be too niche down because maybe every problem is different and that's fine. And that's why they're charging those super high fees. But for somebody that's looking to build an agency, basically a delivery system that provides a certain service, I think it's a no-brainer to do so because it is the only way you can actually service people without you doing the work at scale, basically. Unless, of course, you have very experienced staff, which most new agencies do not, because they do not have the budget. So first step is for sure to list down and try to reduce the number of variables. It's going to be better for your staff. And in being better for your staff, it's going to be better for you.
No question about it. And I think that whole concept of productization, it's hard to productize something that is not repeatable and ultimately scalable. And so they do go hand in glove very much. Now, when you start thinking about the concept of retention, obviously what we see in the industry and the data shows is that the vast majority of e-commerce customers that go to, say, a D2C or a B2C e-commerce website, they are one-time purchasers. That's the vast majority. Somewhere, depending on the brand and depending on the vertical, somewhere around 60 to 70% of customers will be one-time customers. Only 20 to 30% will be recurring customers in some meaningful way beyond purchase 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the longer tail you get out around purchase 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the percentage, the cohort that is viable at that level shrinks. And I always think that retention marketing sounds good in theory, but it feels so difficult in practice in this age of a million brands doing a million different things, customers just inherently not being that loyal anymore because they might be out there looking for the best price for a given product, and so they're not necessarily loyal to a specific seller or even a specific brand. If they're looking for a specific category of product, if there's more than one competitor, they're probably going to compare features and functions and price. And the concept of customers just being loyal in general, I think that's decreased. If we look at even over the last decade, loyalty has just increased alongside a dramatic increase in the sheer number of brands in the market competing for business in every single vertical. And so these two things have clashed to mean that building a brand that is sticky is probably harder to do now than ever before, but it's probably more important than ever before. So it's a super interesting time to be working in this space. Would you agree with that?
I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's, first of all, and this is the reason why we're focusing in the vertical we do, and it is also advice to other people, the type of product and the type of vertical that you're working with largely determines the potential for a quick purchase. Like, for example, if I'm selling this product and I like this product and I see benefit in this product, I will likely buy it again because it's something that I consume and I can keep consuming all the time. If you're selling this chair, I only need so many chairs. So you
Yeah.
can do the most amazing job.
And I guess that's
Perhaps
the
when I need a
beauty
new
of
chair,
working
I might
in
remember to
health
buy
and
that
beauty,
chair
right?
from you,
That by
but I won't
definition,
need too many chairs in my life, right?
yeah.
So the industry and the type of project and the vertical itself largely determines this. Now, having said this, for our vertical, health and wellness, marketing is extremely important. Allows you to be much more profitable because you don't need to pay the CAC that you paid to first acquire the customers month over month, but you can have recurring margin that happens over time. So if you are able to increase the number of people that pay you over and over again without having to pay Zuckerberg again, then it is amazing for your business. It can really transform the economics of your business. So I guess we're being smart in the sense that we're focusing on solving a problem for people that are in pain with that problem. It really matters to them. If I tried to sell retention marketing to furniture companies, probably I would not go.
Yeah, anything that's a consumable starts to make a whole lot of sense from especially a big investment in retention marketing. In fact, it was interesting. I recorded a podcast episode yesterday with a branding specialist, a design specialist who works in exactly the same vertical that you do. And one of the reasons why they specialized was not only for similar reasons to you, but what they felt was is that the health, wellness, and beauty space, which is the three areas, the three buckets that they focus on, they felt that those products oftentimes had as much of an emotional connection with the customer as a physical benefit to the customer. There's some sort of a emotional tie to those brands that they feel like, okay, we're in this together. We're a team. We're a team trying to make me feel better, help me have a better life. You're making products that are going to make my life better, ultimately, medium and long term. There's no quick fixes here, and we're not pitching a quick fix. And so she felt that there was an inherent emotional stickiness that extended beyond the product stickiness. And that's one of the reasons why she loved to work in this space, and in terms of helping them develop their go-to-market and their messaging and their positioning and their pricing and their branding, because she felt that there was just so much to work with inherently in these products and in these brands and in these verticals. Would you say that's part of it too?
I think in almost every case, yes, because the nature of a consumable, at least when thinking about supplements, is such that you don't immediately experience the benefits unless it's some sort of, I don't like,
An anti-inflammatory or
you
curcumin or
know,
something like that, where you might
yeah,
experience it quickly.
like a fat never gives you energy. So like, unless it's something like this for the next 6 months to like actually feel better. So there has to be some emotional buy-in for you to keep doing this. So I would say it's accurate.
Yeah, super interesting. And do you find oftentimes that when these brands, do you work with startup brands in the space, or do you primarily work with established brands that are trying to then take their business to the next level through smart retention strategies and tactics? And how often, when they get to you, are they already doing some form of subscription model, but maybe they've just approached it purely tactically and they put a subscription option on every single product on their website, but they haven't maybe thought about things like bundling and kitting and group buys, and that maybe they haven't thought about, okay, cool, we have a subscription model on our platform, but there's no pause, resume, skip. It's just subscribe or cancel. And that's the only option that's available. So they really haven't thought through what the true life cycle of a customer looks like and what it could look like with their assistance. How mature, I guess, in general, are the businesses that you tend
Correct.
to work with?
We tend to work with fairly sophisticated companies. I would say that the range is fairly wide. So we have companies that would be doing, like they would be just after product market fit, basically, and then companies that are doing like 300 million in annual revenue. So like very large organizations that have gone beyond what you would consider a wide range, but generally sophisticated companies. Even the smaller companies we work with tend to have investors or some sort of like team that has done this before. It's not their first rodeo. So we tend to work with sophisticated companies, and particularly companies. I don't do this intentionally; it's just happened, that have already tried something, usually another agent or another provider, and haven't seen the success. They wanted that kind of bringing us in to clean up in a way. And I don't know why it happens like this, but that's um, how it usually happens. We usually come after they've tried something and they're like, okay, let's bring somebody to fix this. And they are quite sophisticated. So it's not that they would not have um, things correctly set up or that they are having obvious gaps. But the common issue that I see is that there's actually two main issues. First is what I call the retention clarity gap, which is basically that people are not measuring things correctly. There's this fog somehow in retention marketing where we don't really know if we know it's working, but we don't know how much it's working and we don't know how to know if it's working. There's a lot of confusion around attribution and incrementality and what was working and what we should actually do. And there's management teams that usually are like, no, don't do incrementality tests because we might lose money. Will this really move the needle? So there's top-down pressure to not largely feel like the sidekicks of the acquisition team. So it's a very big problem. And then the other problem is that when it comes to subscription and when it comes to, I think it's fair to say that generally is at the edge of technology, or we try to be at the edge of technology. And when it comes to those newer technologies, there's not that much info. They've developed a technology that makes, and it's not new, they've just innovated on it. It's a technology that allows people to purchase through emails, for example, or to make the emails interactive. And this is brilliant. But then what happens is that Zemo, of course, is a smaller company. We don't have like a huge content marketing motion, which means there's not that much education around it. So brands don't necessarily know how to best leverage this. And the same applies to subscriptions and so many other things that are related to it. I was speaking to Pace quite popular when it comes to email marketing. She's been doing this way longer than I, and she's launching an academy for this reason, that there's and just this gap, educational gap, when it comes to our industry. So we tend to go to sophisticated companies, but just because they're sophisticated doesn't mean they don't have the pro.
Totally makes sense. And how mature are these even more mature businesses in the area of understanding wanting to retain the right type of customer versus wanting to retain or incentivize customers or de-incentivize the wrong type of customers to stay in the business? And I'll give you an example. You might have the same, on paper, two customers that look identical, right? They spend about the same amount per year. They make around the same frequency of purchases. They've stayed with the company around the same amount of time. So they have around the same CLV. They have around the same AOV. But on paper, they all look the same or very close. But one of them, they maybe make 2 phone calls, an email, and a live chat on average per purchase, whereas the other one might make zero point 0.5 contacts per purchase. Or one might return at a 20% rate and one might return at a 2% rate. So we have, and then you might have the same customer that has a high cost to serve. They have a high propensity discount, meaning they will typically, like 80% of the time, they will only buy something if it's discounted or on promotion, or they're getting some sort of killer deal for going on a subscription or something like this, versus the other one that 80% of the time they buy at full price because they're locked into the product and they're committed to the product regardless of the price. And the net profit that each of these customers bring to the table are a very different proposition, regardless of the top line metrics. The bottom line metrics can look very different. And so therefore, if I'm the seller, I'm going to want to incentivize this customer over here that has a low cost to service and a high net margin for me. I'm going to want to incentivize them to do business with me way more than this customer over here who's hard to serve, they're expensive, they're high propensity to discount. So their net margin for me, their net profitability for me as a business is not great. I'm going to really want to be able to bring in all the data from Gorgeous, and I'm going to want to bring in it from my customer service. There's so many sources of data I'm going to need to bring in for this, and those metrics are going to differ by channel of acquisition typically. So you're going to be going after a specific type of cohort of customer through Meta versus Google versus Amazon versus these other channels versus AppLovin, whatever. And what I find is that even semi-advanced businesses are not often bringing in net revenue per customer as part of their segmentation strategy.
I agree with you. And I think the reason why this happens, like a very easy way to frame this, is that most companies, at least in our industry, they're not customer centric the way they should be. They're still very company centric. They view everything under the lens of the company. You don't really try to see what, theoretically speaking, conceptually speaking, we would all agree that probably the correct course of action is to understand what makes the higher margin customer different than the other customer and try to attract more of those than the other one, right? But like in practice, it's almost, in my experience, almost never happens. They just don't view things through the lens of the consumer. They view things how much we have to spend and we're going to spend it, and then what are the numbers like. They have a different point of view. And what I think happens, again, in my experience at least, is that there's a lot of extremely smart and extremely competent people within those companies that simply don't have the ability to get buy-in from the executives of companies. Like I was just had one of the best sales calls I've had in my life with a massive company in the US. I'm not going to name them, but they're very popular. One of the biggest media and e-commerce health and wellness platforms. And I had an amazing sales call with our life cycle manager where we basically proposed a certain strategy. And she was like 10 out of 10. I really love this. I have the same ideas. I want to do this. But then she could not get buy-in at all from her management. You know, said, listen, I'm going to try and I'm going to talk to them and see if they are open to this. And then they just shut it down. Even though the lifecycle manager understands it, even though they would want to be more customer centric, the executives are too far away from the customer. And they're like, listen, we have targets to hit. This doesn't seem like it's going to move the needle as much as just putting more money on that. I'm not going to look at it. So I think and I find it not have an agency. I would perhaps be focusing on this. I think there's room for highly specialized, highly experienced consultants that do have the ability to go and lead those executives and tell them like, hey, listen, you are approaching this incorrectly because of this and this, or at least you should see this other perspective and then have the authority that the in-house people do not, or that agencies like mine do not necessarily have, because it's always very different when it's an agency. We have to fight hard to earn ourselves how do I say, the trust to lead strategy. Usually an agency is seen more as an execution support, whereas it's very unfair to say, but to be clear, I think we're having much better strategists than most brands have in-house simply because we're working with way more brands than they would. It's just like mathematics, right? But it's very difficult to get buy-in as an agency. So yeah, my hope is somebody listens to this and like becomes a consultant and like starts helping. And there's good people in house, but they can't.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the other area that I see as a missed opportunity, and again, I don't work specifically in your space, but I've seen this over and over again with, especially when I was used to run and build agencies. This is a recurring theme that I used to witness over and over again, is that every single form of marketing that most brands, particularly pure play e-commerce brands would do. They were all push. It was all outbound. It was all email. It was all SMS. It was all push messages. It was all outbound marketing, meaning that we're pushing the message out to the consumer. There's very little closing of the loop and creating an opportunity for the customer to speak to us. And that, to me, lends credence to the idea that you just said, that these brands are business centric, not customer centric. Because if they were customer centric, they would be able to do this segmentation. And then what they would do is when a customer, and I'll give you an example of this exact thing. So I lived in New Zealand, and then 2.5 years ago moved to Mexico. There was an online liquor store in New Zealand that I was a customer of for about 3 years before I left New Zealand. And I would routinely, every 4 to 6 weeks, I would log into their website and I would place a similar purchase. I'd pick a new bourbon. I would pick a bourbon that I always bought, and then maybe I would buy something else, maybe a wine, whatever else, and I would have it shipped to my door because it was convenient. And I was a very consistent buyer for 3 years in a row, spent thousands of dollars a year with them every single year for 3 years in a row. Then all of a sudden, when I moved to Mexico, I just stopped buying from them. They never emailed me. They never called me. They never said, "Hey, did we do something wrong?" They never said, "Hey, have you moved out of the country?" They never, like, you would think that someone who I would assume is a reasonably high value customer cohort in their segmentation, they would want to know why one day, just out of the blue, cold turkey, I stopped spending money with them. These businesses, they have the opportunity to pick up the phone. I have never, and look, I do 90% of my purchasing online. And now I'm out of the ordinary. I realize that's not normal. Most people will but maybe buy 50-50, or maybe they'll buy 30% of their goods online, whatever. I know I'm abnormal. But and I've been buying online for decades. And I have never, ever, in all the time I've been buying online from probably hundreds of different brands, have ever had a brand call me on the phone. Never. It's all been push communications. And I wonder why that is, because this feels like a golden opportunity to create a more emotional connection with your customer and show that you care. And very rarely do customer service teams, are they busy 100% of the time responding to emails, phone calls, live chat, etc. So why wouldn't you want to turn your customer service team into a customer success team and automatically generate out of the system a short list of customers that maybe look like they've churned or whatever, and communicate with them and create a closed loop opportunity for the customer to tell you what they think of you?
Jason, I'm going to disappoint you because I think they're going the opposite direction. I think they're trying to reduce the customer service team and have AI agents do that. So I don't think it's going to happen, sadly. It's, I don't know, like maybe I can't speak for them. Like I try to be humble enough to recognize that I'm not in the shoes of somebody else making a decision I disagree with. I try to be humble in that sense. So maybe the economics of the business tell a different story on the story we're telling now. And maybe it is the sensible thing to have ChatGPT replace people instead of having people call people on the phone. I don't know. But in principle, I would agree with you. In principle, I do think that marketing should be a two-way communication between the brand and the consumer. And then the brand should be listening to what the consumer says and making adjustments accordingly. Now, obviously, always in a principled way that's aligned with the company's values. I don't think you should be jumping through hoops because people are giving you a certain feedback. That's another story. But generally being into, I think is
Yeah, and I think that scaling the unscalable is something that most brands don't think about. They don't think about how can we systematize, how can we operationalize scaling the unscalable thing, right? Even if that unscalable thing is the most valuable thing we could do, why don't we think about ways in which we can turn those opportunities into effectively sales opportunities, right? And incentivize people in the right way to take those opportunities to grow the business. And I just think that if not one single brand that I've ever done business with has ever picked up the phone to call me, there's something broken in our industry. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me that we've become so disconnected and intermediated away from our customers via the internet that we pretend like this is a number on the other end of the phone or the other end of the email or the other end of the push notification, instead of a freaking human being that would actually like to be treated like a human being. Where do you think retention marketing goes from here? Where do you think the next big, massive gains are going to come? Because email's been around forever, SMS has been around forever, push notifications been around forever, CRO has been around forever as a practice. Some people do it better than others, some agencies do it better than others, but the reality is these four primary tactics and systems have been around for a very long time. What do you think the next big wave in retention marketing and retention strategies, what do you think that looks like?
I think, broadly speaking, the digital marketing industry is going through something that I call service market fit collapse, meaning that like the expectations are outpacing the quality of the service. I think this is happening beyond retention marketing. It's happening especially in SEO. I think it's happening a lot in other areas. So that's one thing that I see. And I think this is only tells that the technology giants, Shopify, for example, will increasingly try to automate. Like I think it was Zuckerberg that said that I want to live in a world where you can just come to us and say, this is my product, press a button, you bring me customers. So there's no need for a creative agency. There will still be a creative agency that perhaps doesn't be better or has their own framework, but it won't be necessary. And I think Klaviyo wants the same. I think Shopify wants the same. So I think there's pressure from that front as well. So the reality of it is that I don't know what will actually happen, but I suspect that the bottom of the market will be wiped out because of those technological shifts. And I think perhaps it will be replaced by something else. But regardless of whether it gets replaced by something else, I do think there will always be room for really exceptional people at the top of the game. The best intensive marketers, I don't think they're going to be in trouble. The best advertisers, I don't think they're going to be in trouble. The best SEOs, etc. Having said this, how does this play out over time? When those people grow old and then pass away, there won't be new people entering the field anymore. So I don't know, but it's tricky. I try to be optimistic about the changes in the sense that, again, I think that if I get in trouble, everybody's going to be in trouble. So I try not to worry too much about it. But I won't lie that we have been thinking as a company of ways we can use technologies for advantage, and that we've started using quite a bit of AI ourselves. And we're now in the process of developing internal, at least for now, micro SaaS as well. So things that would allow us, for example, to segment in even more intelligent ways than we already do the human element of our services. So this is something that I would suggest most agencies.
Yeah, look, I think we're all questioning our place in the ecosystem, especially for those of us that have been in it for a very long time. And I definitely think that the fact that you and me and many others in our industry have really drilled down into a super tight niche, I think that does help because it allows us to go deep instead of just broad. I think that the people that do broad things but don't necessarily go deep in those things, it feels like that's a little more vulnerable of a place. Whereas I've been doing what I do, my experience, ChatGPT doesn't have the 25 years of experience that I have. And so it doesn't know the stories that when I go into discovery, for example, ChatGPT can't do the on the fly consulting based on little experiences that relate directly to the customer situation, directly to the customer's use case, directly to the customer scenario that they find themselves in right now. And I know that, for example, I was I just started working with a new SI because I don't just work with manufacturers and distributors. I also work with SIs and platform vendors, and they are just starting to hit the B2B world really hard. And in the B2B world, so they've historically worked with D2C brands and B2C brands, not B2B brands. And they're just really starting to go hard at the B2B space, particularly for D2C brands that are trying to establish strategic wholesale channels and routes to market. And what they discovered is that it was difficult. A lot of their customers are coming to them and saying, look, we want you to help us develop strategies around our pricing model, our price tiering for our customer groups. We want you to help us understand retention through the lens of pricing strategy. And in the B2B world, because you typically have a price list per customer, that whole pricing strategy and that whole price modeling becomes a really big deal. But there's subcomponents of that whole thing that they've never had to consult on before, that I've consulted on many times before. And so they're like, hey, what we would like to do is bring you in for these very narrow strategic engagements where we can consult on everything else, but we don't do consulting on this thing. But we know you do. Why don't you come in and own this? Just this. We're only probably going to need 2 workshops on this, plus some customer interviews on this specific thing, and we'll let you own that piece because that's what you do. And it just feels like the tighter that niche of areas where you have expertise and the deeper you go in those areas of expertise, the easier it is to find areas where you can get inroads into the market where people that are broader just will never be able to tackle. That's the sense that I'm getting from the market at the moment.
I agree with you. I do. Again, my concern is how will people that are entering the industry today be able to reach this level of expertise? This is what concern, because there's essentially a reduction in juniors required, basically, right? Because the
Yes.
easy work can be done through technology. So how do they enter the field? That's what I think is concerning long term for our industry. That like how does this move? But again, I'm assuming that the reduction of certain roles will lead to the creation of other new roles. So we'll need to see how it goes, but optimistic. So I think I'll figure it out.
I think the upside of AI for those juniors is the fact that education is now, or it can be anyway, near free, right? They don't necessarily need to go to university. They don't necessarily need to go get a degree. They can have a conversation, an hour-long conversation with ChatGPT about some of these subjects, these topics, these areas of expertise. They can get an education. They can ask questions. They can say, what would you do? Here's the scenario. Here's the client scenario. Here's what we're trying to achieve. Give me some starting points here that we can build upon. Feel like, whilst you're right, the junior opportunities are few and far between, are going to become few and far between. Because, for example, if I was going to hire, I have a lot of partners, both technical and strategic. I deliver all the services that my customers receive from our company. I deliver them directly. And if I was going to hire someone to work alongside me, they would pretty much need to be an A player out of the gate, because that's what the customers who are paying me expect. They expect an A. They don't expect to be working with a junior after I sell them on our services. They don't be pawned off to a junior that doesn't know all the shit I know. And so I think that the beauty about AI is that a lot of the collateral that I've created, a lot of the documentation I've created for clients, that can all be ingested by AI, and it can all be turned into a Q&A type of resource for an internal resource that then can get up to speed pretty quickly, at least in assisting me inside the business to be able to start to scale faster and broader. And so I feel like that's probably the direction we're headed. And we are moving into a world probably where there's a lot more independent consultants, business owners, small agencies, as opposed to the idea of a mega agency with 500 staff to 1,000 staff to 10,000 staff. I think those ones, they will start to struggle because a lot more of this stuff will be brought in-house in a lot of these brands, because they think they can do it with technology and with augmented capabilities of internal teams. But there will still be these strategic surgical areas where they're going to want external help, and they're probably not going to want to necessarily go work with an Accenture, but they would probably love to work with either an independent or a small agency like yours.
I've heard so many bad things about working with Accenture. It's a
Yeah,
company.
yeah, totally. Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's been super, super interesting. What would be, as we wind down to the end of our time together, what would be you know, if a brand working in the verticals that you support, the health and wellness space, let's say they're a startup, they think they have pretty good product market fit, they're really early in their journey. What are the one, two, or three things that you think they should start thinking about now, very early in the piece, around retention marketing, even if they don't have a massive customer cohort that are of existing customers to go and market to? What do you think the things they should be thinking about strategically from almost day one that you see brands not thinking about?
If you look through the reasons why people cancel subscriptions across 50, 100 different companies, you'll probably see that the common patterns are it's too expensive, I have too much, and then I didn't get the results that I wanted. And all of those three problems suggest that the customer was not onboarded correctly. They did not have the right expectations of when they would be getting the results. They were not conditioned to using the product, so now they have too much. Enough clarity on why the product they pay for is worth the price, which is why they find it too expensive. Those are the same. But one thing that you can do from a retention standpoint is think about the first few days after somebody purchases and how you can create the best possible experience for them, starting from the transactional communication all the way to after they've received the product and you're checking in with them and trying to see if everything is all right. So that's the single biggest lever for meditation. Give like a number so that people can wrap their heads around this, even though it's not 4%, it can be like 20 or 40, let's say 30%. Basically, those first 30 days, the single most important thing that you can do for your customers. And oftentimes, what we do for companies is help them restructure this in a way that's better for the customer because they all have something, but they have things that are not necessarily relevant for people, right? So one thing in our industry is that people talk a lot about the ingredients of the product, but nobody really cares about like an email that talks about vitamin C. It's not exciting or relevant enough. So it usually needs some tweaking and some fine tuning, and then the results can improve quite significantly after. So that's my advice. Focus on the first 30 days. And just a second thing, don't be too afraid to message people. A lot of good brands are afraid to send emails because how will people perceive us? If they like what they receive, they're going to perceive you in a very positive way. So don't be too afraid. Be worried about, is the content I'm sending good enough? And if the answer is yes, then send it.
Maybe making a phone call in that first 30 days to follow up with the customer is where this is a good
Could be.
fit.
Could be.
Listen, it's been a fantastic conversation. If people want to get a hold of you, I'll drop your LinkedIn link into the show notes as well as your website link into the show notes. But if people want to talk to you about all things retention marketing, what's the best way to get a hold of you outside those two?
Easiest way to get a hold of me is LinkedIn.
Yep.
I'm basically every day.
I love it. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. So, Mr. George KAPERNAROS, what is your question for me today?
How would you recommend I find high quality
Great
content?
question. So, I originally, when I first started out, for say the first 100 episodes or so, I was doing one-to-one outreach on LinkedIn. It was all just DMs, connections. It was graft. It was hard slog, right? Or I'd reach out to friends that I already knew that I was connected with in the community. But luckily, what I have found as I got to 200, 300, 400 is that only about 25% of my guests today do I have to go out and solicit. About 75% of my guests, either they reach out to me directly or they have a promoter or a PR person or somebody on their team that reaches out to me and says, hey, would you like to have our CEO or CFO, whatever, on the podcast? So I can tell you for a fact that the longer you're in the game, the more episodes that you do and the more well known that you become, this outreach effort will decrease dramatically. But I also found some interesting people through Reddit. I found there's some interesting little communities online. I found some interesting people through X / Twitter as well. But I would say that greater than 75% of the people that I reached out to and ultimately have come on the podcast, I met through LinkedIn. Definitely.
Clear. Thank you for the feedback.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to speak to you again soon. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.